Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Deputy Chair, and I rise very proudly tonight to speak to the Higher Education and Research Reform Amendment Bill 2014, and I rise as the Chair of the Senate Committee into Education and Employment. We conducted a very comprehensive inquiry into this piece of legislation, over 169 submissions, 4 days of hearings, and I'd like to congratulate all of those that took time out to make a submission to the inquiry and indeed attend our hearings and give us very, very good evidence. I'd also like to place on my behalf, particularly, thanks to the Secretariat for their tireless work in producing what I think is quite a comprehensive report where we traverse the history of higher education in Australia that lands us at the place we are today, which is the reality we have to deal with if we want to continue to have and increase the excellence of our higher education system whilst continuing its strong accessibility. But I just want to briefly quote Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And so for the first 5 minutes, I absolutely adored everything Senator Carr had to say about higher education, the role of universities in society, etc. Absolutely crucial, which is why they have to be financially sustainable and accessible to all, which is exactly what this government is doing through this education reform agenda. When the credit card statement arrives, the responsible thing to do is to actually pay the debt, just as this government is setting out to do when inheriting Labor's hefty credit card bill. A commission of audit took place and ministers were told to find savings within their portfolios. A package of higher education reforms were the result of Minister Pyne's deliberation, striking a fair balance between careful savings and strategic investment by this minister. The ultimate goal is to spread opportunity to more students, drive creativity and innovation, and ensure our universities are equipped to face the challenges of the 21st century and that Australia is not left behind. The higher education sector gets it and supports the government's planned reforms contained in our bill that we're speaking to today, reforms which directly benefit higher education providers, students and communities, whilst driving economic growth and productivity. The key elements of the reform are fee deregulation that will give universities the longed-for freedom from government control, allowing them to make independent choices, not just about fees, but about teaching methods, courses to be offered, scholarships and other services in response to the market. And let's face it, the market in this conversation is students, and they're not all young people leaving Year 12. There is strong evidence that fee deregulation will lead to greater competition, and with greater competition comes greater choice. And contrary to the rowdy views of a small number of critics, the higher education sector welcomes it. What bemuses me is the failure of our critics, including Labor, to acknowledge that fee deregulation already exists for postgraduate and international students, and that most higher education providers see full deregulation as the next logical step in the evolution of our higher education system. In fact, students have been progressively making increased contributions to the cost of their higher education under successive governments since the 1980s. Even in Whitlam government years, there were no free education because, in reality, with university costs funded by the taxpayer. Cabinet papers also later revealed Gough Whitlam's free tuition had little impact on the composition of student intake, with a continued overrepresentation of students from wealthy backgrounds. A decade on, faced with the financial strain of a free education and greater pressure to expand education opportunity for the growing number of students completing Year 12, the Hawke government introduced the HEX scheme. In a speech at the Victoria University of Technology a few years later, the then Treasurer Paul Keating said, and I quote, "There is no such thing, of course, as a free education. Somebody has to pay. In systems with no charges, those somebodies are all taxpayers." He adds, "This is a pretty important point. A free higher education system is one paid for by the taxes of all, the majority of whom haven't had the privilege of a university education. So I think we all need to ask ourselves if that is a fair thing. Bob Hawke, in an interview in 1988, states, "I don't have any problem with the concept of fees. In fact, one of the greatest stupidities was the proposition that the Whitlam Labor government introduced a free education. There's no such thing as a free education. It's a question of who pays and how it's paid for." End quote. The Howard government introduced a partial deregulation of student fees and domestic full-paying undergraduate places that were later abolished by the Rudd-Gillard government without adequate compensation for universities. The Rudd-Gillard government went on to introduce a demand-driven system whilst cutting funding by more than $2 billion. In fact, the previous Labor government announced a number of saving measures, in plain speak, cuts, to higher education grants and student support totalling $6.65 million from 2011-12 to 2016-17. Labor Senator Carr vehemently opposes this whenever raised during the inquiry hearings, despite it being fact, in black and white, in the budget and my EFO papers. And it was an odd approach for a Labor government, led by a Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, who advocated diversity and specialisation in universities. Julia Gillard reflects in her new book, "I am particularly proud of our decision to unchain Australian universities, to enable them to define their own mission and educate more students. This is precisely what the coalition government's reforms seek to achieve." And she adds, "As a result of the new system, while students continue to compete for places, universities increasingly have to compete for students. A better run, better quality university can attract students who might be considering other university." Fee deregulation is all about making universities compete for students. One wonders what Julia Gillard thinks of her party's apparent shift in direction. Claims of skyrocketing fees by student unions, Labor and the Greens as a result of deregulation fees also lack substance. The reliability of the methodology behind two of the most referred to studies from the NTU and NATSM have been questioned more broadly, and I just want to go to those assumptions because as anybody that appreciates a good mathematical model, the assumptions underpinning the model actually are what we need to go to before we start screaming $310,000 degrees for social work, as was the claim this morning. The assumption under the modelling that was used is that we didn't go to what the actual fee may be. There's only been one university, the UWA, that suggested a fee setting, and evidence throughout their inquiry from vice-chancellors and all, even some of the Labor Party, even Quiggins, Professor Quiggins came, that universities are going to charge differently for different things. UWA has decided to do a broad brush fee across all their courses. Other universities aren't going to do that. CSU, for example, with their fabulous vet degree, might choose to charge a premium for that particular product and another fee for some of their other offerings. But when we go to the assumptions underpinning that modelling, they jump straight to the international fee setting, the highest fee you can charge within Australia for undergraduate. They then charge the 6% bond rate over 20 years. Bearing in mind the bond rate for the last 10 years has only been 3.8. They then factored in some time off, presumably to have some children or indeed to travel. So that got us to the worst case scenario for a social work degree, which was $310,000. The best case scenario for somebody that might want to, using those same assumptions, of which I've actually poked some holes in, but if we go to keeping the same assumptions, that same social work degree, in the best case scenario, costs $42,000. So to run out there and scare, and it is a scare campaign because it is affecting the students and the families who are not seeing higher education as an investment, but rather, first generation particularly, need to be convinced that it is an investment worth making, that they can do their social work for $42,000 rather than the $310,000 quoted this at. So it's absolute furphy, absolute furphy. It is scary, and they've got to stop saying it because it's actually not true, even using their own modelling. The NTU admits in its report that not every university degree at every university will cost $100,000, but we don't hear that in the public debate, in the public discussion, and that is reprehensible. That is morally reprehensible, particularly when we're talking about increasing access to higher education by those that we need to actually get through the door. NATSM modelling is based in the University of Canberra, and that's understood to be the only university in the whole country that doesn't appreciate or is actually opposed to fee deregulation. Groups representing universities have issued a variety of public statements and modelling showing universities can be relied on to act responsibly in setting fees. Analysis by the ATN, Innovative Research Universities and the Group of 8, and assurances from the Regional Universities Network all show this. And member institutions of the Council of Private Higher Education have also confirmed that whatever they receive in Commonwealth support to students will be passed on to students through reduced tuition. So for Senator Rhiannon to stand up here and say nobody has talked about lowering fees doesn't actually go to the evidence. Let's talk about the evidence, let's talk about facts, not fear. Nor is there any basis to comparisons with other deregulated higher education systems. It's been the rhetoric throughout of an Americanisation of our system. A directly comparable system doesn't exist. Australia's higher education system is unique in comparison, as the reform package will ensure no upfront financial barriers to access higher education for all students, irrespective of their means. So for Senator Carr to talk about merit, to talk about financial impact as being some barrier, our system still offers income contingent loan scheme, the ideal of the world. This was evident based on expert views to the Senate inquiry hearings with Professor John Dewar, who explained the US system was not one national system, as would be the case here. Rather, it was extremely complicated and diverse. So to actually say that we're having an Americanisation is false. Similarly, in a submission from the Group of 8, explained that debt burdens like those in the US are simply not possible in Australia. In Australia, our help system of student loans mean graduates only repay when they've got enough money to be able to do so. Whereas in America, the US crippling debts are incurred by graduates because they do not have a provision of such loan support. Further deregulation will drive a more competitive environment for universities, so charging exponentially higher fees will only result in empty lecture theatres and tutorials, because Australian students aren't idiots, they'll go elsewhere. As ATN Network's Vicky Thompson logically explained it, it would be untenable for a business perspective to do so. And Vice-Chancellor after Vice-Chancellor reiterated that there was not going to be $100,000 degrees hither-thither. There is strong evidence supporting the view that fee deregulation will boost equity and innovation. With providers be able to determine course costs, they'll have to compete on price and quality in order to attract students. There's strong stakeholder support for extending funding to sub-bachelor courses as well as to private universities and other higher education providers, with considerable benefits for regional students. We don't hear about these students. We don't hear about this absolutely fantastic aspect of this reform package in terms of access and equity. I'll keep going. University colleges and TAFEs in the region will be able to offer more courses with qualifications leading to careers or further studies. The idea has merit with a growing number of universities and TAFEs having already forged partnerships across regional Australia. And I go to the Federation University at Ballarat and La Trobe University in my home state of Victoria. These universities and TAFEs are also targeting first-generation students who come from families who did not previously have such opportunity, nor could afford it. More than 80,000 additional students nationally will benefit from these increased opportunities by 2018. Coming from the regions, disadvantaged and Indigenous backgrounds, mature-age students and those with low ATAR scores. Because in the regions we have incredibly low Year 12 completion rates, which means that you can't just go to university easily. These reforms seek to improve student mobility while giving private and non-university providers flexibility to specialise and differentiate from one another. The Kemp-Norton Review and demand-driven funding system found that expanding access to sub-bachelor pathway courses would lead to improved efficiency by better matching students with appropriate courses. TAFE Directors Australia also endorsed these reforms, saying Commonwealth funding is required to support the increasing important role TAFE plays in broadening student choice and access, strengthening the capacity and reach of the system, particularly in regional areas, and addressing critical skills in the Australian economy. And I just want to go to the report, because while we hear a lot from NUS students, predominantly who attend GO8 universities, I want to say, and they always have, they'll end up here in this place or the other place over the way. And that's fine. I love hearing from students. But I did not hear Senator Carr and I did not hear Senator Rhiannon talk about the students who attend private institutions, talk about the TAFE students who will be the beneficiaries of so much of our reform package. And I just wanted to go to the report where the Chisholm Institute explained how, to the committee, they built their degrees on industry strength. This is higher education providers that have very, very clear and direct links with industry. So there are a certain cohort of students that appreciate that don't necessarily want theoretical philosophy degrees, but want to actually realise that the education they're getting at their local TAFE or at their local institute is going to result in a job. Degrees right now at these institutions costing $22,000, $32,000. But I want to go to Miss Sarah Mode, a second-year Bachelor of Dance student, going to a private provider that Senator Rhiannon does not want to see the benefit of being treated equitably with other such students. And I'll quote her, because she chose a career in a profession that's not well represented in our public universities. And I quote Ms Mode, "If and when the bill is implemented, I will have already graduated with a debt of $56,000, of which $11,000 is an administration fee of 25% that our legislation actually seeks to get rid of. More than I need to save for a house deposit. Compare this with my brother, who will have completed a 3-year degree in design at a public university with a HECS debt of around $15,000. I will pay more than 3 times the amount. How is this equitable? Professionals in the performing arts have the ability to share so much with their communities and build culture, and often do so despite earning a lower income compared with other professions." Senator Rhiannon, Senator Carr are wanting to make sure that Ms Mode continues to pay an additional $11,000 other than her brother, and it's just simply not fair when we want to go to equity. I want to touch briefly on Commonwealth Scholarship Scheme. Those institutions with more than 500 enrolled students will be required to put 20% of the revenue raised through increased course fees towards scholarships targeting students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Again, Senator Rhiannon, you went to complain about the GO8 universities' underrepresentation of that cohort of Australians in their university lecture halls. This measure will ensure that proportion increase. So I really would appreciate your support actually in getting that, increasing the Commonwealth Scholarship Scheme so that we can get more disadvantaged students into the great universities in many of our capital cities. Many country students, and I just want to touch, there's been a lot of debate about regional students and the effect on them, but many country students don't opt to study at a regional campus. In fact, evidence is that most don't choose. So we can talk about the Regional Universities Network, but I'm also talking about regional students, regional kids and their future, and by default, our future in regional Australia. And they do it for a lot of different reasons. Steps must be taken to ensure that they can overcome the very real financial barriers to them accessing a quality education of their choice that currently their parents or they themselves have to bear. Our bill seeks to do this. Our Australian education system is unique because it remains cost-free at the point of delivery, contrary to Labor's scaremongering. The Minister for Education, Christopher Pyne, has pointed out because the government currently lends to students at the bond rate that it is fair for them to be charged that. The committee inquiry report showed, I think, overwhelmingly evidence that that may need to be revisited, and I'm confident that the Minister will take the report and consider the report and the evidence we received as we move forward. The bill will see, and I think this is fabulous, $11 billion extra to research. $139 million to the Future Fellows program. That's not in Labor Party's dissenting report. They don't want to keep that. They don't want to ensure we're leading the world in research and can underpin that going forward. I support the bill and I recommend the Senate does the same.
Thank you, Senator McKenzie.